A woman in her mid-20s, dressed in a beige trench coat over a white button-down polo tucked into her pants, paced rapidly around the cold streets, her phone pressed to her ear. As she rounded the corner, her phone rang with the busy tone of an irate customer who had just hung up. Patiently, she redialed the number, but there was no response. After turning into an alley, she brushed her long hair that had been blown in all directions by the howling north wind. Then, she turned her back to the wind and messaged her client quickly. The woman stared intently at her phone as she typed and revised her message, searching for the right words to express her sincerity. However, the sea of apologies she sent before got no response. Just like a stone dropped into the waters, infuriated over something that was not her concern, the woman could do nothing but let out a long sigh to relieve her tension and wash away the chill of the winter evening. She knew she had no place to vent her frustration, so she could only rub her freezing hands together and stuffed them into the pockets of her trench coat while she waited to cross the street. As the traffic signal turned green, she dashed across the road to the company building at 11 o'clock in the evening. The office lights began to flicker and then went out, leaving only the bulb above the woman's head. "Rebecca, aren't you leaving yet?" a colleague asked. "I am still rushing through this list. I'll go when I finish," Rebecca replied. "All right, I'll be leaving then. It's getting late. Make sure to ask your husband to drive to pick you up." After hearing that, Rebecca shook her head thoughtfully. Then, she grinned and said, "Yeah." The truth was that Rebecca was no longer married. Just a month ago, her marriage ended in divorce. The one who had once been closest to her was now seeing another woman. A few more minutes passed, and only Rebecca remained in the vast office after everyone else had departed. After sending the revised event plan to her client, she immediately got a reply a few seconds later. "Rubbish." Rebecca stared at her client's reply. That was all there was to it. Just one word. Helpless yet determined, she remained still in her chair and worked for quite some time. After what seemed like an eternity, Rebecca finally felt tiredness flooding through her system. The lines on the screen started to look more like random symbols, so she knew she couldn't go any further. Ultimately, she decided to shut down the computer and head downstairs. Upon leaving the office, Rebecca made her way to a nearby 24-hour convenience store. She went straight for the sandwich, picked one out, and paid for it at the register. Then, Rebecca looked for an empty seat on one of the tables and began eating her food. She reached into the right pocket of her trench coat and brought out her phone, where she immediately began searching for the contact whose name had been marked with a star. "Do you want to meet tonight?" Rebecca felt a chill in her fingertips once she sent the message. After barely eating a few bites, she tossed the remaining food in the trash and left the convenience store. As the brisk air swept in, Rebecca shivered, jolting her body awake. Then, she looked at her phone again and decided to withdraw the message. However, the other party had already sent a voice message at the same time she did so. Rebecca clicked on it, and a low deep voice greeted her. "Send me your location, I'll pick you up," the voice message said. Rebecca felt her cheeks flush red as she shared her location. "It's cold outside. Stay inside a cafe first. You'll be there in 20 minutes. Rebecca." Okay. It wasn't until Rebecca sat at the cafe and stared at her mocha coffee that she realized what she had done. However, before she could even decide what to do next, the phone in her pocket suddenly buzzed. Rebecca gave it a quick peek, and a notification flashed across the screen. "I am here, on the side of the road." Double flashing lights. She hesitated for another 2 minutes before exhaling deeply. The next second, she already had her phone in hand and was out of the cafe. Approaching the car, Rebecca noticed that the man patiently awaited her despite the freezing winter night. Seeing him standing by the car door in his black alpaca coat was captivating. "Hey," Rebecca greeted. "Get in the car," the man replied as he turned around. He opened the car door for her and placed his hand on the door frame to help her get inside. Rebecca bent down and stepped inside, thanking him thoughtfully. As soon as she settled in her seat, the car's extreme warmth and lovely aroma slowly eased her worries. The man's slim fingers rested on the steering wheel when he suddenly spoke. "I saw you took your message down. I can take you home right away if you don't feel like doing anything." "No," Rebecca said, staring blankly through the windshield when the man heard her response. He started the car and drove to a nearby hotel. They checked into the hotel and reserved a room. The process was as quick as it could have been. As they stood in front of the room, the man had his back against the door, one hand in his pocket and the other holding the room card. Rebecca was surprised when he suddenly handed her the card, his long, attractive lips raised as he said, "You open it." Rebecca curled up her fingers, She tapped the card on the door and waited while looking into the man's deep, dark eyes. Then, with a sharp sound, the door unlocked with a single click. As they stepped into the room, the man turned the doorknob and held her waist in his arms. Following the door's lock, Rebecca found her back pressed against the wall, and her lips sealed by the man's passionate and burning kiss. He grabbed her around the waist and carried her to bed. "I gave you a chance to leave," he warned. The man immediately kissed Rebecca on the lips right after he placed her on the bed. His right hand slipped at the back of her waist, pulling her closer to him. "I won't hold back," he whispered to her ear. After that, he swiftly removed Rebecca's trench coat and threw it on the floor. Claiming her lips for the second time, he drew the coat he was wearing and slowly crawled to the bed, making Rebecca move back until she reached the headboard. Before her head hit the wall on the bed, Rebecca found the man's right hand holding the back of her head. Then, from there, his hand traveled down her nape. The coffee's bittersweet taste permeated the man's tongue. As he claimed Rebecca's lower lip, wanting to deepen the kiss, the latter cooperatively tilted her head to the left. Once the man felt satisfied, his lips traveled from her neck to her shoulder. As he did that, Rebecca started unbuttoning his shirt. She softly moaned as she felt his breath and lips brushing against her bare skin. The man suddenly opened his eyes, meeting Rebecca's long visible lashes from her shut eyes. His gaze then went from her face to her body as his left hand rested on her waist, while the other slowly slid inside her top. The man's moves were fast and smooth, which aroused Rebecca more. In an instant, he was able to unclasp her bra with one hand and throw it to the side of the bed. Rebecca placed her hands on the man's waist and traveled down to his shirt's hem to pull it out from being tucked inside his jeans. "Fuck," the man groaned when her hand reached his navel. Between the deep kisses, they started unclothing each other until their upper bodies were entirely naked, leaving only their jeans. The man kept playing with Rebecca's nipples before he suddenly parted his lips and pulled her body to his, making her feel his length on her. "Let me take this off," the man whispered to her before drawing back, attempting to unzip his pants. Suddenly, Rebecca's hand traveled down his body, making him freeze for a moment. Then, she started to palm him through his jeans. "Ah," the man groaned as he guided her hand to his zipper. Rebecca unzipped his pants, revealing the man's rock-hard member. Then, she moved her hands to her own zipper and started pulling her jeans down when the man stopped her hand and said, "We'll do it, please." She let him remove her jeans until the only piece of clothing left in her were her panties, unable to wait any longer. The man's hand traveled inside the small piece of fabric, stroking her wet part while he continued sucking on her nipples. When he had enough, his lips traveled from her breast to her lower body, leaving soft kisses on her waist to her leg. After a few seconds of teases and kisses, Rebecca guided the man's head back to face hers and whispered, "I am ready." The man smirked, "He'll go hard." Rebecca could only nod before he started entering her core. After a few seconds, the man started thrusting on her with a rhythm that gradually grew faster and faster. Seeing nothing but pleasure and satisfaction in her eyes, he went deeper. "Ah," Rebecca moaned. "Should I stop?" "No, just it's two," Rebecca barely replied as she closed her eyes. The man distracted Rebecca with kisses as he went in and out on her and thrust deeper. He tightened his hold on her hips and kept a steady pace. Gratified, they moaned in unison. Playful as he was, the man suddenly removed himself from Rebecca and entered again, making her scream in pleasure. He kept whispering praises as he continued thrusting. She was also very turned on by how he looked. After a few more thrusts, Rebecca and the man both finally came, exhausted. They slowly fell asleep in each other's arms. The next morning, Rebecca's internal body clock kicked in a few minutes before her phone alarm sounded. When she opened her eyes, she found no one beside her. Suddenly, it made her feel like what happened last night was just a happy dream. When she reached for her phone, she found a note under it that stated, "I am leaving for work, will call you tonight." The elegant handwriting on the piece of paper woke her up instantly, and her drowsiness completely disappeared. Rebecca sat by the bed for a few minutes before the phone rang again. Drawing her blank thoughts back, the phone screen flashed with a strange incoming call. "Hello," she uttered. "Is this Raina's sibling?" An unsettling male voice said, "This is 776, police station." After that call, Rebecca hastily took a cab from the hotel to the police station, where she showed her ID. After verifying her identity, the police officer escorted her to the office. "Your younger brother brawled with another person. Please sign this," the policeman explained. "The opposite party has provided a diagnosis certificate. Compared to him, Raina's injury is relatively minor." Rebecca signed the paper and glanced at what was written on it too. According to the diagnosis, Otis Hill, an 18-year-old male, suffered from a traumatic brain injury. There was a 2-centimeter long wound there. Skeptical, she stared at the column of the doctor's signature for 3 seconds before she asked the officer, "Can I take a picture?" "Yes, you may." Inside the police's office, Raina quietly sat on a chair beside a wall. He lowered his head with his hair, blocking the expression on his face. As soon as the door opened, his eyes met Rebecca's, and he mouthed the word sister. Rebecca walked up to where Raina was sitting, extended a hand, and helped him to his feet. When she held his wrist, he suddenly hissed in pain. Rebecca stared at Raina's wrist, and then the bruise on his face, and the fracture in the corner of his lips. She asked him, "Have you been beaten?" Raina's gaze was brimming with resentment as he held up his hand, and made some lightning-fast gestures. He was trying to communicate with her sister. As he explained the situation in sign language, Rebecca heard a snort coming from the side. Dumb. Rebecca instantly turned around. A young man, his face bandaged, stood opposite her with his hair dyed a striking shade of pink, wearing a sharp suit, and looking stylish despite the wound on his face. The boy returned the look and said, "Why are you looking at me like that? He has been disabled since he was born. A mute is mute, am I wrong?" Raina was about to charge forward once more when Rebecca grabbed his elbow and glared at him. "Are you going to cause a ruckus in the station?" The cop shouted aside, apathetically. The young man snorted and shoved his hands into his pockets. At the door, a policeman called out, "Otis, your family is here to pick you up." As he left, Otis stuck his middle finger behind his back and went out, making Raina almost dash forward again. Outside the police station, a black car was parked at the right side of the station's entrance. A bodyguard, dressed in a black suit, opened the door for Otis as he came up. Otis bent down and entered, saying, "Thank you so much, Uncle Fred." Fred looked at Otis' bandaged forehead for a moment. It looks so fake. Can't that get more realistic? There's not even a taint of blood on the gauze. Otis chuckled, raised his hand, and tore off the gauze. As he removed the bandage, it revealed that he had no injury at all. "Thanks to Dr. Derek, I got issued a medical certificate." Fred snarled at Otis' remarks and said, "Don't try to do this again." Fred was looking at something outside the car window, when suddenly his gaze was drawn to the opposite side. As Rebecca strode through the door, her black pencil pants accentuated her slender, attractive legs. Sensing his uncle became quiet, Otis followed Fred's gaze. "Uncle, is that your type? I do think she has a really hot body and attractive looks." He whistled. "I believe she's the sibling of that little mute." Rebecca's hair twitched when the breeze blew across it. After flagging down a cab, she entered the vehicle and gave the driver the hospital's address. When Raina heard this, he immediately gestured at her to explain that there was no need to go to the hospital as he could just buy an ointment in the pharmacy. "Doesn't your hand hurt?" Rebecca asked, glancing at him. Immediately, Raina was rendered speechless. He could only lower his head and follow his sister's order. As soon as they arrived at the hospital, Rebecca requested a doctor. "I want to see Dr. Derek Walters." The hospital at that time was filled with patients and people who had their checkups. The doctor, Derek Walters, had a long queue of people waiting to get treated by him. So while waiting, Rebecca bought a bottle of water for Raina and contacted her team leader to ask for a leave of absence. Not long after she sent a message, their team leader, Sarah, replied immediately, "Sarah, how about your client?" With the mention of her client, Rebecca felt her irritation boiling again. "Rebecca, she's a little tricky. Sarah, provide me the final result as soon as possible, preferably no later than when I leave work today. Mr. Peter has already been informed of the concern. Are you still committed to getting promoted as a deputy team leader?" Rebecca took a couple of slow, long breaths, and replied, "Sure, will do my best. Thanks for reminding me that." She searched for her client's name in her inbox again, paused for a moment of reflection, and sent another message. However, a red exclamation point this time appeared in the dialog box. Apparently, the client had already blocked her. The term rubbish written above was even more grating for her. Rebecca felt annoyed when suddenly a woman's voice over the speaker called their names. She breathed heavily before taking Raina and ringing the bell of the doctor's office. Dr. Derek, who was wearing a white coat, sat at the desk and took the medical card from Raina's hand. Then, he examined Raina's sprained wrist and bruised face. Derek gave various medications and said, "There's nothing to worry about the wrist cartilage tissue, or his face being injured. Just be careful not to get water on it. Get these medicines, and you'll be good." He turned his attention back to the monitor of his computer, clicked the mouse, and said, "Next." However, the woman in front of him didn't move an inch. Derek was confused. So he asked with a frown, "Is there anything else you need?" Rebecca remained silent for a while. Then, she placed her phone on the table and used her fingers to pinch and expand the image displayed. "Dr. Derek, you do realize that the hospital would punish you severely if you issued a forged certificate, right?" Derek was about to grab the phone from his desk when Rebecca suddenly blocked him and retrieved her phone, squinting his eyes. He said, "It's not up to you to decide whether it's fake or real. Yes, but we'll know if it was indeed a forged certificate if you bring over that kid and run another test." Rebecca smiled and added, "The diagnosis certificate is at the police station anyway." Derek looked at Rebecca fiercely upon hearing her remarks. Even though he couldn't deny that she was beautiful, he was not the type of person that mere looks could win over. Thus, he didn't even bother to look at her longer. Leaning back in his chair, Derek tapped his finger on the table and effortlessly offered, "I can pay for the medical bills, if that's what you came here for." With that, Robert's face remained expressionless. "I am not here to ask for money." Then, she suddenly leaned a little closer and the corner of her lips slightly curved into a smile. "But I would like to ask you to do me a small favor. A really small one." After hearing what Rebecca said, Derek cocked his head and squinted his gaze. If he hadn't known Atis' character, he would have assumed this was Robert's trap to get him to take the plunge. Left with no choice, Derek puckered his lower lip, took out his mobile device, and dialed a number.